Hello and welcome to Sexient Beings. I'm going to be your leader today, Alex Pruitt. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to move out of their old toxic patterns, traumas, and beliefs to create relationships from a place of deep connection, pleasure, and fulfillment, whether with themselves or others. Our topic today is emotional literacy. Now, when I mentioned this topic during our call last week, I didn't realize that this was a term. I figured it might be, so I did a little bit of research on it just to see what was being said about this topic. And it really comes down to the idea of knowing how to recognize different emotions that exist within your system, not only for like the name of that emotion, but also that you can recognize how they're showing up in your body, along with the different skill sets to be able to implement working with them when they are showing up. And that's a little bit of what I want to talk with everyone here about today. Um, Part of my experience with getting into emotional work has really come down to this noticing that I wasn't okay with being with my emotions. Um, it was this state in my system where, on a very subconscious level, I wasn't allowing myself that presence with them. So when they would finally come out, they would be this volcano because they had been repressed so long. If you think about the idea of a pressure cooker, I wasn't noticing when there was the first bubbles. I was only noticing when this thing was completely overloaded and needed to release either that like vent of steam or maybe the top was coming off of it. And that's, to me, the top flying off of it was the bigger culminating experience I had. And it was this big moment of chaos that came up in my outside world around divorce. And it sent me down this path where I was just completely lost in a highly emotional state. It triggered all sorts of fears, all sorts of old narratives that told me how I existed in this world in going through this divorce process and this loss and this grief around that relationship with my ex-husband. But there was this really beautiful point that came out of it. To me, that point was, yes, there was all the like horrible emotions that I didn't want to be feeling or experiencing. On the reverse side, I would have these moments of just pure joy and elation at the simplest little things with my son, or even with in spaces with friends, being able to notice more of the world around me and connecting with deeper love, joy, bliss, states of ecstasy. And I realized it was kind of like going from having been in like an old black and white tube set TV to now all of a sudden I'm in high def HD, say all the works. It was almost too intense feeling at times, but I recognized this difference and I knew I didn't want to go back to the old tube set TV. Um, it was so dulled out for what I was allowing my experience to actually be. And the more I got into being able to work with my own emotions and being able to even have spaces of conversation and communication with them, the more it led to a balance. So that HD feeling of emotions isn't so over the top and intense because I've kind of acclimated into being present with them. I don't know how many people who are listening recall the switch over to HD and big flat screen TVs. I remember hearing a whole lot of complaints that like everything looked like reality TV, or hearing that actors and actresses actually didn't like this transition because you could see more of the flaws that were showing up because there was higher resolution, higher pixelation, and they didn't want other people necessarily observing these. But it's sort of that same sort of thing. Like now you watch one of these TVs and the image just seems normal. It's everyday life for the way you get to observe this image, right? The way you get to observe that sound compared to the older technology. And you could even consider that the way that you have been present with your emotions, especially if it's been in this lifelong pattern, an older form of technology. And if you decide to go down that path of opening up to your emotions, opening up to more present ways of being with those states. I don't want to call them new emotions because they're not. They're emotions that you at some point in life were able to tap into. You may have not had the words, you may have not had the concepts for what they were, but at some point you got told you're not supposed to feel this. It's not okay to feel this. It's not safe to feel this because other people probably weren't able to be present for you when those were showing up because they weren't comfortable. They didn't feel safe. They didn't want to feel the pain or witness you in the pain you were experiencing with those emotions coming up. Let's see. So one of the things I really want to touch on in this is that your emotions actually start as physical body sensations. We can get caught up in this idea that emotions are something we control with our brain or that are initially functioning in our brain. Our brain makes up a story of why those emotions are showing up, but the emotion itself doesn't actually start in the brain. There's, or at least the rational thinking brain. So when we try to work with the emotions from just this emotional, rational part, we can think that we need to make the emotion go away versus bringing presence. Over time, that actually creates this tiering of repression. Can also refer to that as contraction or suppression around the emotion. And that creates this holding, not only of the emotion in our system, but in the physical body because we're trying to no longer feel this thing that we don't want to feel because we consider it painful, hurtful, scary, whatever it may be. I do want to clarify, you can also not enjoy feeling what most people would categorize as positive emotions, such as love, happiness, joy. That's there isn't goods or bads when it comes to being with emotions. It's really only the ways that we've been taught and that we interpret emotions and like have told ourselves that they can exist in our system, in this whole mind body place. It's our whole body is an organism. It all works together. We just like to give our brains a lot more credibility in controlling all of that. But yes, so back to the emotions start as physical body sensations, and that's in a reaction to a stimulus in the world around us, or that we have this need. So, like as babies, we're hungry, our diapers wet, whatever it is, like we need to be held. That baby cries, right? That's there's the stimulus in the outside world, or this need of the physical system, that triggers an emotion to come to the surface. Then where the rational brain comes in is that tells us a story, right? It gives us the logical thing of trying to find the resolution to working with the emotion. Where was I going with that? So yeah, it comes down to this idea of us thinking about how to be with the emotions. There's a lot of that modeling that tells us emotions aren't okay. I know a big one for me was, or big two for me were anger and sadness. At no fault of my parents and caretakers and the people around me when I was young, I very early on got that expressing anger was not okay. So that was something when I would feel those sensations in my body, I would try to tamp it down really quickly. Um, this actually led to later on in life me having no recognition of how to be with that emotion or listen to the signals of what that emotion was trying to tell me. It, if it did come out, it would feel like this explosion in my body. And that's, to me, that idea of the pressure cooker. But when I would notice it on more nuanced levels, and to me, this was after many years of repressing that feeling of anger, it wouldn't come out as much as anger towards other people. It became self anger. It became that I wasn't doing enough, I wasn't good enough, I was too much, more of those dualistic ideas. But it would come out as a lot of self hatred. And at the time where that was the most prominent in my life was in my early teens. And that actually ended up relating to a lot more suicidal ideation, um, wanting to self harm, not self harm to commit suicide, but self harming because that immediate sensation in my body of being cut, of punching my leg, whatever it was, it took me out of the pain I was feeling internally inside, at least for a second. And it's one of those things, like it wasn't about attention. Actually, I don't think that most people in my life had any idea that that was going on at that time. And more people know about it now in my life, but it was also this whole own, or its whole own beast that carried shame around it. And that's where a lot of these things relate back to shame of being with the emotions. If you've listened to any of the other sessions of Sexient Beings, there's at least one time where I end up talking about how I've had chunks of time in my life where I didn't cry for years. And that is very accurate. I remember There was points in my 20s where it was probably every where there was chunks that were 3, 4 years long, where I did not cry at all in those spaces. With that, when I did finally cry, when something intense enough for my system to finally recognize that I needed to cry came up, it was just floods, right? So then that didn't help because it didn't feel like it was ever going to stop when it did start. And there were all these layered feelings of sadness wanting to come forward, wanting to move through. Emotions are motion, energy in motion. These things want to move through your body. But with all this pressure, all this stagnancy that happens, we limit and restrict their ability to do so. So, all is not hopeless. You don't have to be stuck crying for weeks or months. You don't have to just be in these constant loops, right? Of like deep diving into this emotion or having some huge peak chaos moment that brings up all your fears or brings up all these old narratives about your value, about your ability to be loved or anything like that. It's literally in making a choice to be able to see and be and feel with the world differently. And that's where it's the idea of bringing consciousness. You're bringing consciousness, you're bringing noticing, and ultimately this state of it's an open awareness, because while you may be giving names to these things at different points, like calling it sadness, calling it anger, calling it jealousy, you're not judging that and giving it a name to shame it. I do want to be clear that this can be very deep and intense work for certain people. If you ever find yourself in this sort of work, in this sort of self work, and you're not able to self regulate in that, you find yourself feeling immensely overwhelmed, feeling like the world is exploding into chaos around you, just feeling like you need support or guidance, then by all means, reach out. Either start doing certain practices and work with a friend that you trust, with your partner, if the trust exists there, with a family member, or have people you can talk to about this sort of work who can be that open portal and that open space to helping get curious about what your experiences are. Community can be so helpful, especially in learning how to bring presence to and process your emotions. Because most of those wounds that have told us that some set of emotions, some set of sensations or feelings in our bodies aren't okay. Like as a baby, you have no judgments on what any of those things are. Even as a little kid, you don't have judgments on what any of those things are until the world around you, your parents, siblings, other primary caretakers and guardians, eventually your peer groups, start telling you this is okay, this isn't okay. This will have me be loved, this will have me be hated. That's the more we let those compile, the more you end up getting bound up in your own system, and then not being able to bring that full presence, full movement or expression of your being out into the world. One of the other pieces I really wanted to make sure and touch on, because there has been so much that's at least been coming to my notice around mental health and diseases in general with the body, is like we talk about, or there's a lot more information, let's say, coming out about trauma, right? And most people think of trauma as these big events that happen. Like the person was in war, the person was raped, um, they were brutally assaulted, things like that. Those are trauma as well. But to me, trauma are those big instances or little instances that happen within your being because of circumstances in the world around you that tell you you should or shouldn't, can or can't be any certain way. They're the things that help create these narratives about your safety, your lovability, how acceptable you are in the world exactly as you are. And when we come back to this idea, you can start seeing how each one of these little things, it forms, say, a knot. It forms a knot and another knot, and they all end up linking together. They all end up chaining along this line that then gets to be this huge, messy ball. And that can be a beautiful hot mess of a ball. I'm not going to deny that. At the same time, like it's still not that rope in its original form. It's still not that expression and being. That rope doesn't have its freedom and its movement. And that constriction we give to our being, to our emotions, and our ability to be with our emotions, it doesn't just create that restriction around our emotional body, it also creates that where these sensations show up in our physical body. And when they show up in our physical body, that can show up as chronic pain. And especially if you're going into a doctor over and over again for the same issues and they're not able to bring it down to some sort of answer for you over time, like that could be a good signal of this. Most people, when you get into study or like bigger studies of larger diseases, will end up relating that they believe their disease in their body, whether that be cancer, other neurological issues, fatigue, whatever it may be, relate to the level of their stress in their life. There was actually one of the studies I heard about recently, and one of the ladies interviewed was talking about how one of her bigger MS flare ups related to her around a conflict in her marriage. Like this conflict in her marriage happened, and then very shortly after, her MS had a flare up, which to me, with the research I've done, the work I've done in myself, makes sense. but it can be harder to conceptualize and harder to notice in ourselves just because we don't have that information, we don't have these concepts. And so that's why hopefully the space and sexient beings can help expand you in that awareness. And the other piece coming back to holding these things in the body. So it doesn't just show up as chronic pain, other illnesses and disease, which if you break down is dis-ease. I love that breakdown of the word, because it, to me, it has it cognitively make a little bit more sense why that word exists in the state it does. It can also relate to numbness in the body. Same with when you are having an emotion and somebody asks you what you're feeling, and you're like, nothing. Well, numbness, right? The feeling of nothing, it has a set of sensations in your body that tells you, I'm feeling nothing. So a big piece of this, it's getting into working with the body mind, right? And the emotions by identifying them down into their sensations. Because right now, with the actual emotions we experience and we have names for, we can actually have a lot more of the terminology that tells us this thing is good or bad for me to feel. And even on a subconscious level, we will end up going into narratives of, I shouldn't be feeling this, I can't be feeling this, and trying to reject that in our system. The bad thing again about this rejection, or the unsavory thing about this rejection, is that doesn't reject it and get it out and away from us, it clamps it down in our system. So one thing most people probably have not done is getting into recognizing the sensation sets that actually come up with the emotions. The more you can do this, the easier it is, one, to identify what emotions you're having come up, because emotions very rarely show up one at a time. They tend to send or show up in some sets in our bodies, and when they show up as a set, that information can get even more confusing, right? Because now it's like you have multiple people talking to you, and you're trying to pay attention to multiple conversations at once versus just a one-on-one conversation. But yeah, the more you can get into nuanced communication with the individual sets of emotions, bringing those your presence, the easier you can recognize which emotions are showing up, the easier it is to notice them at nuanced levels in your system versus the volcano effect or that pressure cooker effect. You can notice when there's the initial tingles of anger or sadness or joy showing up in your system, rather than it needing to be alarms blaring, lights flashing, like full sensory overload of this emotion showing up for you. So the ways that you can get into starting to do this for yourself, one is to start educating yourself or finding other sources that have this material available of what the emotional spectrum looks like, right? And I tend to base the idea of the emotional spectrum off of the idea that anybody has the capability to be, feel, do, experience anything. And if that is possible, right, if those possibilities are infinite, then all of us have the ability to have experienced all the emotions. And you can initially break that down. I think there's typically like 6 broader categories, right? There's happy, calm or peaceful, sad, angry. The other ones are eluding me. I keep getting an image of a chart with several different little happy faces on it. And I believe that might be from some of my son's school curriculum, because they're going over just the basic emotions, even in kindergarten. But there's also bigger wheel images that you can find, and it breaks down those chunks into more nuanced labels for what emotion subsets fall within each of those bigger categories. The thing I like about the wheel is that it shows paralleled emotions, and this isn't always going to line up exactly, but one of the experiences of things I keep coming across, and it keeps showing up through the work I've done and through research, is that we have emotions where, let's say, you have anxiety that shows up in your body. And when it shows up in your body, the general body region is typically in your stomach, in your solar plexus area, right? But you also have on the other side of that excitement. To me, both of these sensations, when you actually break it down to the nuanced sensations of it, are almost identical. It's just at one point in time, with the excitement, we'll say, we're generally accepting that we want to be feeling this at this time. And so we interpret those physiological signals as excitement. On the other side of it, when we're experiencing anxiety and if it's something we don't want to be experiencing, there's that rejection. So that's where it becomes the bad feeling, the thing we don't want to feel. And it creates that holding in our body. But once again, it's the same set of sensations, just without acceptance for them showing up. And when you start looking at it that way, and what my experience personally through this has been, is that when I end up avoiding feeling the anxiety in this example, I actually dull out my ability to feel the excitement. And this doesn't just go with these two emotions. For me, there was also a link between anger and passion, right? Both of those for me, like, very viscerally show up as this heat building in my chest. One of the other conversations Rachel and I had, and I haven't done any further research into this, but it was around how love and shame can be kind of not always directly opposite from each other in feeling subsets. But my guess is if I actually broke down what those actual sensations showed up as in my body, they would probably be fairly similar. It's just one It's the accepting that I want to be feeling this thing. The other is the rejection. I can't remember what it might come from Buddhist philosophies, or it's out of breathwork practices. But the idea is those feelings that we accept, right? Those sensations that we accept, those are the ones we bring the breath to. The ones that you don't want to feel, you're holding the breath. And I can actually validate when I worked in massage or when you notice somebody crying, like one of my first instincts has always been to give the person the instruction to breathe or to take deep breaths. And that's usually when we're feeling something in our body that we don't want to feel, that's uncomfortable, that feels painful. We hold our breath. And we won't even realize we're holding our breath. So you got two pieces now, right? You have doing more research to understand what different emotions are. You have a very simple tool that's if you have emotions coming up, and especially if you emotion or notice emotions or sensations that they're ones you don't necessarily want to feel, just breathe. That's you can think of the breath kind of as this like washing away, blowing away, whatever you want to. But when you allow yourself to breathe with it, it passes. It actually diminishes in size and intensity fairly quickly. Like another bigger wave set may come up depending on the intensity of the emotion. But when you bring your breath to it, it it helps alleviate it in your system. It helps release that energy and move it so it's not remaining stagnant in your body. Another piece is doing emotional embodiment work, and that can look like working with a professional, right? I mean, any of these things you could go to a professional for. You can also, to me, do that by going into practices where you're allowing yourself to be with that emotion. One of my favorite ones, and it will probably be a workshop I offer in the future, it was pretty much just that, an emotional embodiment workshop. And it was this idea where I sat down with this group of women through the Vita training course that I went through. And the instructor of the course led us through this space where she would like set the container, she would play music, tell us what emotion we were supposed to be embodying in that moment. And I think there was a variety of like 4 to 6 different emotions, varying between um, anger, disgust, happiness, ecstasy. There was a handful of different ones in the spectrum. But in that, and that very defined space of connecting with the emotions, you got to see on a very visceral and physiological level what those sensations actually felt like in your body, how that energy wanted to move in your body, like maybe during anger, like your legs just your legs feel on fire. Your legs feel like they want to kick, your arms feel like they want to punch. You feel like you want to like throw your whole body against whatever your target is. Like whatever that is for you. There's no rights or wrongs in that, but you get to notice it on this very nuanced level. And you could do that practice 10 times. And each and every time, you could notice a new layer to bringing presence to that emotion. I'm going to tell you, it's not just a one and you're done. Like this sort of work, honestly, any sort of self work, none of it's quick fix. You've spent your entire life creating sets of patterns, sets of beliefs, sets of narratives that tell you how you should, shouldn't, can, can't be in the world. And working through those things isn't quick. Like you're not going to do it all in a weekend. It's not reasonable. Let's say you're 35 and you're just getting into this realm. You've literally spent 35 years building those narratives. It's not going away in a 2-day workshop. But you can learn to keep working with it, learn to work with it for how it's showing up for you now, and learn to trust yourself in that you're going to know what things are calling to you, what mentors, what teachers, what coaches, what therapists, what influencers, whoever those people are, so that you can go find your healing. The one thing I can guarantee you is that it took you a hell of a lot longer to get to where you are right now than it's going to take you to go through that healing process, especially if you are actively doing that work and not just falling back into your old patterns. I guarantee you at some point in time, you will fall back into your old patterns. That's normal. That is so normal. You spent years building this path of how you respond and react in the world. You can imagine this as a trail through the woods. You've spent, again, 35 years walking this one trail through the woods over and over and over again. You're deciding you want to make a new trail. You can actually rewire your neurological networks to create a new trail. And the thing that happens is the more you keep using this new trail over and over again, and it's a conscious choice, because when you look at this new trail you're cutting, it's not as worn in. It's not as dug into the dirt as this old trail was. But the more you keep taking it and consciously choosing to take it, the more overgrown that old path gets. And eventually, at some point in time, you may not even remember that that old path was there. Like if you really went looking for it, if you brought consciousness back to that old path, then yeah, you could find it again. You could find where those trail marks were, all the things. But ultimately, it's making a decision for how you show up with you. And the more you can show up with yourself, the better you're able to show up in your relationships and in your connections with the world, to be able to, quote unquote, manifest and create the reality you want to be having and experiencing outside yourself. So let's see, bringing nuanced sensation to your emotions. That was where we left off. I think for now, I'm going to leave the help recommendations at those 3 pieces, because those can be a lot. If you want resources beyond connecting more with the sensations, you're more than welcome to reach out to me by message or set up a free discovery call. I'm happy to give resources, or work with you through coaching if that's something you feel called to. There's no pressure either way. It is here as a resource for you and whatever you're moving through at the time. Right now, what I would really like to invite anyone who's listening to do is just doing a little bit of an emotional inventory. So I'm going to invite you just for a few minutes. If you don't have time right now, that's okay. Then save it for later or make a mental note if it's something you do want to do, and you can come back to it. But just make sure if it is something you want to do, make that commitment to yourself that you're going to do it. It's one of the biggest things. You're learning how to show up for yourself. You're learning how to show up for your own system, your own emotions, so you can learn to work with them. So this little check-in right now, it's just a inventory of today, right? And we're not going to get into the nuanced sensation right at this moment, but I just want to invite you for a couple minutes to sit with it and notice what emotions have shown up in your body today, from the moment you woke up until this moment in time right now. How many different emotions can you say that you've noticed? Can you name what those different emotions are or were? Just see, just see how you feel about each of those emotions. Is there any of those emotions that you feel like you shouldn't have felt, that you wish wouldn't have shown up, that you didn't want to be feeling? Are there any of those emotions that you wanted to feel more of, that you're glad showed up, that you wish would show up more regularly in your life? There's no right or wrong answers here. All of this, it's just an exploration. And again, just notice. Being able to slow down and to just notice what is there. It's really a luxury that we take for granted. There's so much in the world around us. And again, in that modeling, in the very normalized social world, with the input of technology, with all the thing that tells our systems that we need to go and go and go and go, and to push and push and push and push, and to do more, take in more, to be more. But there's this beautiful, delicious quality that comes with slowing down. It comes with just being with yourself. And again, just notice. If you notice judgments coming up, that's okay. Just notice. If you notice that you're drifting off and not paying attention and not bringing something your focus, just notice. Over and over and over again, it's just about bringing this curiosity to your being, to your experience. So I think I'm going to wrap things up for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment or to send a direct message or reach out to me personally with a discovery call. Um, any follows, referrals, recommendations, anything like that are thoroughly appreciated. I also would really love to invite anyone listening, especially on YouTube, to drop any comments of topics you would like to hear about that revolve around sex, love, and relationships, or this aspect of reality, because I love playing in the spaces of reality as well, and these filters we end up applying to our lives. Again, what we were talking about today, the way we end up restricting our emotions, we're applying a filter to what our experience is. I want to help you all remove those filters and get to see the world in all its glory and beauty. It is one of my deep passions. So, thank you all for joining, and I will see you next Thursday. Bye.